Welcome to this new video by Simplilearn. In this video, we are going to see top front-end developer interview questions for 2023. Front-end developers build and implement the user-facing side of websites and applications using languages such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create visually appealing and user-friendly designs. Many companies hire front-end developers ranging from small startups to large corporations. Some big names include Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Uber, Netflix, and Adobe. Salary of a front-end developer in US ranges between $87,000 to $140,000 per year, whereas in India it ranges from 2 lakh rupees per annum to 11 lakh rupees per annum. Salaries definitely depend on the skills and experience. So if you are looking to become a skilled front-end developer, then have a look at our postgraduate program in full stack web development. By the end of this course, you will be skilled with HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, AWS, Java, and much more. Some tools covered in this course include Angular, CSS3, Docker, Git, SQL, MongoDB, and more. So hurry up and enroll now. Find the course link in the description box. Our learners have experienced huge success in their career. Listen to their experience. Find the Simplilearn's course reviews link in the description box. So without any further ado, let's start by knowing top front-end development questions to ace in your interview.
What is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it is the language of the internet. It is a standard text formatting language used for creating and displaying pages on internet. HTML documents are made up of the elements and tags that format it properly and display it on pages. So we have our next question now. What are HTML tags? So the answer for this question is HTML tags are used for placing the elements in a proper and appropriate format. Tags use the symbols greater than and less than to set them apart from the HTML content. The HTML tags need not to be closed always. For example, in case of images, the closing tags are not required for an image tag. Now, followed by the second question, we have our third question. What are HTML attributes? The attributes are the properties that can be added to an HTML tag that change the way the tag behaves or displayed. For example, an image tag. An image tag has src attribute with which you can use the source from which you have to display the image from. Now the attributes are added right after the name of the HTML tag inside the brackets. The attributes can only be added to opening or self-closing tags, but never in closing tags. Now followed by third question, we have our next question. What is marquee in HTML? Marquee is used for scrolling text on a web page. It scrolls the image or text up, down, left, or right automatically. To apply for a marquee, you have to use marquee tags. Now we have our fifth question. How do you separate a section of text in HTML? We separate a section of text in HTML using the below tags, which are the break tag, paragraph tag, and block quote. The break tag is used to separate a line of text. It breaks the current line and shifts the flow of the text line to a new line. Followed by that, we have the paragraph line. The paragraph line is used to write a paragraph of text. And third one, the block quote. The block quote tag is used to define large quoted sections. Now we have our sixth question. Define the types of lists in HTML. So we have the three types of lists in HTML, which are the ordered list, unordered list, and definition list. So first we'll discuss the ordered list. The ordered list uses OL tag and displays elements in a numbered format. Next we have the unordered list. The unordered list uses UL tag and displays elements in a bulleted format. Thirdly, we have the definition list. The definition list uses DL, DT, and DD tags and displays elements in the form of definition, like a dictionary. Next we have our seventh question. How do you align list of elements in an HTML file? We can align the list elements in an HTML file by using indents. If you indent each nested list and further than the parent list, then you can easily align and determine the various lists and the elements that it contains. Now we have our eighth question. Differentiate between ordered list and unordered list. So the answer for this question is an unordered list uses UL tags and each element of the list is written between LI tags. The items are displayed as bullets rather than numbers. Now coming into ordered list. So for creating an ordered list, you'll be using OL tags, and each element inside the list is written using LI tags. The list items are displayed using numbers rather than bullet points. Now we have a sample on the screen right now. So the first three elements are a set of unordered lists which are represented using bullet tags, and the second set, which is the coffee, tea and milk, is an ordered list which is represented using numbers. Now moving ahead, we have the ninth question. How do you display a table in HTML web page? So the table in HTML can be created or displayed using the table tag. So it also uses to manage the layout of the page, for example, header section, navigation bar, body content, footer section, etc., etc. So given below are a list of HTML tags used for displaying table in an HTML web page. So we have table, tr, th, etc., etc. Table is used to define a table. Tr is used to define a row in a table. Th for header. Td for a cell. Caption is used to define a caption, and we have the col group, which is used to specify a group of one or more columns in a table for formatting. Next we have col, which is used with col group element to specify column properties for each column. Next we have tbody, which is used to group the body content in a table. Next we have thead, tfooter, which are used for header content and footer content respectively. Moving forward, we have our 10th question. How do you display the given table in an HTML web page? So the answer for this question is written on the right side part of my screen. This is the sample code which you can use to represent or display a table which is given in this particular format over here. Now followed by this, we have our 11th question. How do we insert a comment in HTML? So the answer for this question is, we can insert a comment in HTML by beginning with lesser than sign and ending with a greater than sign. For example, as shown in the right side part of my screen, which is hello world. Now moving ahead, we have our 12th question. How do you insert a copyright symbol in HTML? So you can insert a copyright symbol by using ampersand copy semicolon or ampersand hashtag 169 semicolon in an HTML file. Now moving ahead, we have our 13th question. So what is a white space in HTML? So the answer for this question is, an empty sequence of space characters is called as white space in HTML. This white space is considered as a single space character in HTML. Whitespace helps the browser to merge multiple spaces into one single space, and so taking care of indentation becomes easier. Whitespace helps in better organizing the content and tags, making them readable and easy to understand. With this, let's move into the 14th question. How do you create links in different sections within the same HTML web page? So the answer is anchor tags. We can use anchor tag along with referencing through the use of hashtag symbol to create several links to different sections within the same web page. Moving ahead, we have the 15th question. How do you create a hyperlink in HTML? So the answer is, we can use anchor tag. Again here the same thing. We can use anchor tag to create a hyperlink within the HTML that links to another web page. The hyperlink can be added to images too. Now moving ahead into our 16th question.
If getting your learning started is half the battle, what if you could do that for free? Visit SkillUp by Simplilearn. Click on the link in the description to know more.
Define an image map. So the answer for this question is, an image map in HTML helps in linking with the different kinds of web pages using this single image. It can be used for defining spaces in the images that are made part of the image mapping process. Moving ahead, we have our 17th question. Why do we use style sheet in HTML? A style sheet helps in creating a well-defined template for HTML web page that is both consistent as well as portable. A single style sheet template can be linked to various web pages, which makes it easier to maintain and change the look of the website. Now the 18th question, what is semantic in HTML? So the answer for this question is, semantic HTML is a coding style. It is the use of HTML markup to reinforce the semantics or the meaning of the content. For example, the semantic HTML B tag is not used for bold statement, as well as I tag, which is not used for italic. Instead, we use strong and EM tags. Now, followed by the 18th question, we have our 19th question. What is SVG in HTML? So the HTML SVG is used to describe the vector or raster graphics. SVG images and their behaviors are defined in XML text sheets. It is mostly used for vector type diagrams like pie charts, two-dimensional graphs in an XY coordinate system. Now moving ahead, we have our 20th question. What would happen if there is no text between the HTML tags? So the answer for this question is really simple. There would be nothing to format if there is no text present in between the tags. Therefore, nothing will appear on the screen. Some tags, such as the tags without closing tag, like image tag, do not require any text between them. Now, followed by the 20th question, we have our next question. How do you create nested web pages in an HTML? So nested web pages basically mean a web page within a web page. We can create nested web pages in HTML using the built-in iframe tag. The HTML iframe tag defines an inline frame, for example, which is displayed on the right side part of my screen. You can see the iframe source, which redirects the user to Simplilearn's official web page. Now, followed by that, we have our 22nd question. How do you add buttons in HTML? So we can use the built-in button tag in HTML to add buttons to the HTML web page. So on the right hand part of my screen, you can see the implementation of button to an HTML web page. Now, followed by 22nd question, we have our 23rd question. What are the different types of headings in HTML? So the answer for this question is, there are basically 6 types of heading tags in HTML, which are defined with H1 to H6 tags. Each type of the heading tag displays different text size from another, where H1 is being the largest and H6 is being the smallest. So on the right hand part of my screen, you can see the implementation of heading tags from H1 to H6. Now the output for this particular code segment is the H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. So you can see that H1 is being the biggest one and H6 is being the smallest one. Now moving ahead into our 24th question, how do you insert an image in the HTML web page? So the answer for this question is, you can insert an image in the HTML web page by using the following code, which is displayed on the right side part of my screen. You can see we have a image source is equals to tulip.jpeg, which is used for inserting an image into your HTML web page. Now our 25th question. What is the alt attribute in HTML? Now the answer for this question is, the alt attribute is used for displaying the text in place of an image whenever the image cannot be loaded due to any technical issue. So basically, when you have poor internet connection and you're trying to load an image, you can see some sort of text in place of an image. So that particular text is nothing but the alt attribute. Now moving ahead, we have our 26th question. How are hyperlinks inserted in the HTML web page? You can insert a hyperlink in the HTML web page by using the following code, which is present on the right side part of my screen. You can use the anchor tag along with hrefs, and inside that particular tag you can use the URL to which you want your users to redirect to. Now followed by this, we have our 27th question. How do you add color to the text in HTML? So the answer for this question is, you can add color to the text by using the following code, which is present on the right side part of my screen, where you can add red color and blue color, green color to this particular paragraph and headings. Now followed by 27th question, we have our 28th question. How do you add CSS styling in HTML? So there are 3 particular ways to add CSS to your HTML. There are inline CSS, external style sheet, and internal style sheet. We'll discuss each of these methods in a bit more detail. First, we have the inline CSS. So it is used when less amount of styling is needed, or in cases where only a single element has to be styled. To use inline styles, add the style attribute in the relevant tag. Now moving ahead, we have the external style sheet. This is used when the style is applied to many elements or HTML pages. Each page must link to the style sheet using the link tag. Now we have the last one, which is the internal style sheet. It is used when a single HTML document has a unique style and several elements need to be styled to follow the format. Internal style sheet is added in the head section of the HTML page by style tag. Now followed by this, we have our 29th question. What hierarchy do the style sheets follow? The answer for this question is, if a single selector includes 3 different style definitions, the definition that is closest to the actual tag takes precedence. Inline style takes priority over embedded style sheets, which takes priority over external style sheets. Now our last question for the session today. How do you add JavaScript to an HTML web page? So the answer for this question is, we basically have 3 methods to add a JavaScript to our HTML web page. They are inline, script block, and external JavaScript file. First, we'll discuss the inline. You can add JavaScript to your HTML elements directly whenever a certain event occurs. JavaScript code can be added using attributes of the HTML tags that support it. Now the next one, that is the script block. You can define a script block anywhere inside the HTML code, which will get executed as soon as the browser reaches to that part of the document. This is why script blocks are usually added at the end part of the HTML documents. Now the last one, that is the external JavaScript file. You can also add or import the JavaScript code from a separate file and keep your HTML code clutter-free. This is especially useful if there is a large amount of scripting added to the HTML web page.
Here, we'll talk about basic CSS interview questions. Now, name some CSS frameworks. As we know it very well, today in CSS environment, there are so many frameworks that are available. Okay, like we talk about CSS, these are the basically necessary libraries which offers you some very popular ready-made components which you can utilize into your existing project, and without writing much code, you can really create some awesome effects. So some of the very popular libraries are like in Foundation, Bootstrap, Gumby, UKit, Semantic UI, and many more which are available here. Okay. Now, what do you understand by the universal selector? See, universal selector, as you know it very well in CSS, normally we talk about specific selectors, like in talk about class selectors, ID selectors. They select a specific set of elements or a specific element. When we talk about universal selectors, universal selector is matches any element types, like instead of selecting elements of a particular type. So you talk about like an asterisk where all elements irrespective of what name and what category they have it, all will be selected. Next, tell us about rule set. See, typically rule set is for the identification for selector which can be attached with other selectors. So there are normally two rule sets are available. One we talk about declaration block and we talk about selector. So declaration block contains one or more semicolons separated by declarations, set of styles which we say, and the selector is means or which particular element this CSS style will be intended for. Next, what are the elements of CSS box model? Okay, so we know it very well. The CSS box model is all about offering you the layout, which is a part of the design element. So in CSS, we can see these elements are like in images. You talk about text. Okay, you talk about padding, which is so-called area around the content. You talk about border, talk about margin. Okay, so you talk about this CSS box model. Next, difference between CSS3 and CSS2. We know it very well. CSS has changed a lot and CSS3 has brought so many new features. So we talk about the difference. So in CSS2, so CSS splits up the different sections of code into the modules. So in CSS3, both CSS and HTML were put into the single file. In CSS3, there were no new way of writing the CSS rules. There are new view rules are available in writing a CSS rules. Normally in CSS3, it is a backward compatibility maintained by with the CSS3. But in CSS2, we do not have any backward compatibility maintained by the CSS2 here. Now, how can CSS be integrated into the HTML page? Like, in order to utilize this, we always use the style sheet. We use style tag. Okay, so multiple options are available. One, we talk about using the style tag in a head section. Else we talk about inline styling with an element itself. Or third, we talk about external style sheet which you can link it with your current HTML page, which anyways enforce reusability. Coming back, what is the RGB stream? So RGB stands for red, green and blue. So it represents a color in CSS. So they are basically starting with the color number 0 goes till 256. Next, what is the purpose of developing a CSS? Okay, the main purpose of developing a CSS to basically offer the visual appearance to give the better look and feel to your code, so that your HTML will offer only the skeleton part, but when it comes to the beautification, you talk about organization and everything, you talk about the CSS. Okay, so CSS offers the styling part of your web page which looks more attractive. So what is the difference between class and ID? See, these are the two different type of selectors are available in CSS. Class selectors and ID selectors. So class is the way of using these HTML elements. So they are not unique and have multiple elements. Where the ID is unique and it can be assigned to a single element. So with CSS, different documents can be controlled using the single style. So style can be grouped in a complex situation to offer the consistent look for the multiple HTML pages. So that is what the advantages you have it. So you can group multiple styles together and that you can reuse over the different pages to offer the consistent styling. Okay. Now we talk about some intermediate CSS interview questions. So here in the intermediate level, you will see like the first question is like what define a Z index. See, Z index is specify the stack order of the elements that overlap each other. Okay, so its default value is 0 and can take both negative and positive values. Okay, the higher the Z index value is stacked above the lower index element. So it normally takes the following value, talk about like an auto, number, initial and inherit. Next, you talk about what are the benefits of CSS Sprite. See, the main benefit of CSS Sprite is like loading a multiple image is not an issue. Okay, blinking is not seen. There's some advantages are available. Like when you talk about like one single or small images, it really takes a lot of time to download it individually. So CSS Sprite's loading multiple image is not an issue. Blinking is not seen because normally what happens, blinking happens when the image is getting loaded. So advanced downloading of asset doesn't make a place of until needed. That's the benefit of having the CSS sprites. Next, how can you target the H3 and H2 with the same styling? So you can do the comma separated. So you can see multiple elements can be targeted with using comma separated. So you use comma separated values to give the consistent style to both the elements. So name and media types allowed by CSS. So media types are basically a part of your responsiveness. Different media types are allowed like in speech, audio, visual, tactile media, continuous or paged media, grip media or bitmap or interactive media. These are all type of medias are allowed in CSS. So how can you use CSS to control image repetition? So we talk about no repeat. So background repeat properties which is available. So you can see background repeat none so that it would not be repeated again and again within your background. Okay, so we're talking about the next questions like about the image scrolling control. How you can control the image scrolling so that you want the image to be remain fixed and rest of the part gets scrolled. So here it is a part of your background attachment property. So here you say the background repeat, no repeat, and you see background attachment fixed. So that when you scroll down, your image is not going to be scrolled. So that is the benefit of this image control scrolling. Now, name some font related CSS attributes. So we have some options available, like you talk about font style, weight, variance, size, family. These are the font related CSS attributes. Define contextual selector. So normally in CSS, the contextual selectors allows developer to specify style of a different part of the document. Okay, so style which you utilize it can be aligned directly to the static HTML pages to create independent classes. Okay, that's called contextual selector. So responsive web design. Responsive web design is a web design which you want to remain consistent across multiple device screens or the different type of screen sizes, and you want to offer the better layout which doesn't looks bloated over the different websites. So that's the benefit which you see when you talk about like responsive web design. CSS nomenclature. CSS nomenclature means the styling commands are written in a value on a property fashion. Okay, so normally CSS includes a system terminator semicolon. The entire style is wrapped in a curly braces and attached to the dedicated selector. Okay, so this actually creates a style sheet that can be applied to an HTML page. So this is the standard nomenclature. Okay, now coming back to the next point, advanced CSS interviews. I will tell you about few questions which are normally asked as a part of advanced CSS. Okay, now when do you use translate instead of absolute positioning? Okay, so the translate in a CSS, okay, transform value on changing. You can talk about opacity or transform. Okay, so the browser reflow or repaint is not triggered when you talk about this translate. Okay, so the transform requires a browser to create a GPU layer for elements. Okay, but using the CPU changes absolute positioning property. So translate is more efficient and result in shorter paint times. Next, name different ways to position same aspects in CSS. Okay, so you talk about positioning properties. Okay, so there are 5 different positions values are. Number one, you talk about fixed, you talk about static, you have absolute, you have got relative, and you have got sticky. So 5 different positioning elements are available in CSS. What are mixins? Mixins is a similar to the function block of code returning a single value. It is a kind of function which we say, okay. So traditionally it is used in a SAS, or okay, which is typically called statically awesome style sheet. So that code that directly compiles into the CSS styles. So how can you optimize the web page for the prints? So you actually identify a control, okay, so-called contents areas of a website. A general website has a footer, header, sidebar, or nav bar, or content area. So normally we say conquer the print media without changing the website's integrity by using the page breaks. So creating a styles for print, size your page for print, and avoid unnecessary HTML tables. So using this you can optimize the print of your web pages. So what is the meant by CSS working under the hood? So when your browser display a document, it actually combines the style, okay, which presents information and document content. So the document is actually processed in 2 stages. Number one, conversation, okay, or conversion of HTML and CSS into the document object model, so-called DOM, and DOM display contents of browser. Difference between the use of ID selector and class selector, we have already seen that, but this is a simple demo of how the ID selector and class selectors are used. The difference is all about using, so here you have a called ID which you use dot, sorry, this hash, and there you use dot. So tell us about CSS float property. So normally CSS float properties of positioning an image to the right or left as needed. So it typically including text wrapping around it. So all properties of elements used before it remain unchanged. That is known as called float. So what do you understand with the pseudo elements? So pseudo elements are special effects to your selectors. So normally CSS finds, okay, use in applying styles in a HTML markup. So if additional markup or style is not feasible for a document, then pseudo elements help by allowing extra markup without interfering with the original document. Difference between logical and physical tag. So normally logical tags focus on the content, okay, and are older as compared to the physical ones. Logical ones do not find much usage in presentation in terms of utilization. At the same time, physical ones find application in presentations. So how media type works in CSS type? So we have discussed already about the media type. So we normally say 4 different type of media properties are available, like in print, speech, and screens. Okay, like you talk about print media screen, so we use always @ media print. You talk about H2, so this changes according to what option you're offering it. So guys, here we have multiple CSS question, and frequently our CSS interview questions are offered. Like tell something about CSS3. Okay, so we say CSS is divided into the modules and is supported by almost every single browser. Okay, it is an advanced version of CSS2 and offering you lot many other advanced level features which typically in CSS2 we do not have that. Okay, now we talk about how CSS selectors used. So with the CSS selectors we can choose any element of your HTML. Okay, so you talk about element, attribute, you talk about any child selector, you can basically select it. So what are CSS image scripts? So the group of image placed into the one single image is in a CSS image script. It can reduce the load time because individual images certainly take more time. So this takes more time comparatively. So we have got explain CSS specificity. So the CSS specificity is a rank or score that decides style declarations to be used to an element. ID selectors have high specificity while universal selector has low specificity. That's how the specificity is all about. So the four CSS categories that authorize the selector's specificity levels are IDs, inline, element, pseudo, and class and style attributes. So these are a different type of conditions based on that the specificity is considered. Define gradients in CSS. We know the gradient are again a CSS3 properties that allows displaying the smooth transformation from one type of color to the another color. Okay, so that's really awesome technique through which you can talk about linear gradient or else you talk about radiant gradients. Two different type of gradients are used and supported. So what are the properties of flexbox? So we know flexbox are basically designed for the alignment purpose. So typical the flex boxes are flex direction. You talk about wrap, flow content, align items and the contents like that. It is once again the property of alignment. So tell us about the usage of CSS box model. So normally box model is a box binding in HTML elements that includes padding, border, margin and the actual content for the more better alignment. So normally with the box model, you get an authority to add a border all around the elements and define space between the elements. So what are the position states in CSS? So we normally talk about four positions in CSS, so-called relative, static, absolute and fixed. The default position is state is always static. So difference between absolute and relative in CSS. So normally relative is useful for some tags in CSS. If we write like 20 pixels, then padding shift 20 pixels in a right. But when we talk about absolute, so it is absolute is relative to the non-static parent. That means if I'm talking about, if we say right 20 pixels, the result will be 20 pixels far from the right edge of the parent element. That's how the relative and absolute position is. So what is the common between class and ID? See, both class and ID used in HTML. Okay, for the CSS purpose, the ID is used as an element where the class is used. So let's get started with the beginner JavaScript questions. We have multiple levels available. Here we start with the beginner level first. So the first question is always like, what do you understand about a JavaScript? So we know it very well. The JavaScript is a very popular scripting language. It is basically designed for client-side scripting and server-side scripting development. Why server-side? Because nowadays JavaScript is also used in a backend using Node.js. So that's why it is also called for server-side development. So the question is like, JavaScript is actually also helps the developers to develop some more responsive HTML pages, okay, which can be well understood and executed by the web browser, okay, which having the support capabilities for object-oriented programming skills. Now, the next question is like, what is the difference between a JavaScript and Java? See, the reason is because the JavaScript initials are Java, So everybody think like, okay, there is some relationship with the Java. So actually the thing is like, there is no relationship with Java. I would say JavaScript is object-based language, where the Java is object-oriented language. A lot of syntax and some standards are matching with Java. That's why exactly it is saying it is JavaScript. Otherwise, there is nothing like that. But another difference, if I talk about, JavaScript is mainly designed to run in the browsers, where the Java is designed especially for the virtual machine and operating system. Now the other thing is like JavaScript does not need a compilation because it is directly used interpreter. But when you talk about Java, it requires a compiler as well as the interpreter both. Now, what type of various data types are supported? So all standard data types like in byte, short, int, long, float, double, character, boolean, these all different type of data types are supported in JavaScript also, just like in traditional programming languages. Okay. Now, what are the features of JavaScript? So the first feature which you always remember, it is a lightweight programming language. It is being interpreted by the browsers rather than compiled. It is a cross-platform. That means it can work across multiple browsers. So it is not specific to the browsers. So that we need to understand. Next, it is an open source. Hence, you do not need to pay for any licensing fees. It comes free with all different type of browsers. It is an object-oriented, but I would not say it is a pure object-oriented. I would rather say it is an object-based language. Next, it can gel well with multiple front-end as well as the back-end technologies, because most of the languages which are coming up in a market, they have a support available to get integrated with the JavaScript, and due to that, JavaScript is very, very popular. So it is also used especially for the development like a network-based application. So in case if you want to have some kind of network-centric application, here the JavaScript really suits very, very well. Okay. Next question, what are the advantages of JavaScript? So the first advantage which we are talking about, like JavaScript basically have a very, very nice interactive language. It is a event based, okay, functional programming language, I would say. So it is a quick feedback because it loads very, very fast in your existing web pages. It is giving you the support of developing a very, very rich user interface. Because of that, your application look consistent across multiple type of browsers. Another is like we have a variety of JavaScript based frameworks are available. Like you can talk about Angular, you talk about React, you talk about Vue. They're all basically different type of JavaScript based frameworks that helps the developer to enhance their skills with writing less amount of codes. So how you create a script or how you create an object in JavaScript, it is very simple. The curly braces. Curly braces is basically designed to give you the feel of this is a typical object. There are a variety of ways are there to create an object in JavaScript, which we're gonna see in our next PPT. Okay, now here we see about the next set of questions which are there with us, like how to create an array in JavaScript. So creating an array in JavaScript is very, very easy. Now you can see the square brackets. Okay, they are the way to basically create a array in a JavaScript. So just a square brackets are the very, very simpler way, so-called literals, to create the array objects in JavaScript. Actually, you should know that array is also object, which is a predefined object comes with your JavaScript, so-called implicit objects. Now, what are the built-in methods available in JavaScript? So you remember about these methods comes from those built-in objects comes with your JavaScript, as we have mentioned in our last slides, like math, boolean, string, okay, date. They're all basically predefined objects are available. Under those objects, these methods are actually available. Like date, if you can see, it will display the current date and time. Concat, to concat two different type of string. Push, some adding some new records into your array. Pop, to remove. Round, to do the round. Length, to calculate the length of the string. So these are all some well-known methods or frequently used methods available in JavaScript. Now, what different type of scopes available in JavaScript for the variables now? So scopes are basically designed to give you the visibility within your program. Okay, so different type of scopes are available. One is called a global scope. So global scope is having the availability within a file. Anywhere else you can access this particular code or particular variable. That is called global scope. And local scopes are those scopes which are accessible within a function and hence cannot be accessed by any other function or outside of this function. So two standard type of scopes which are available here. Now, what is this keyword in JavaScript? This means to refer the current object. Okay, so whenever you see this keyword, it is designed to refer the current object in JavaScript. So we typically define this keyword to assign the value to my current object properties. Usually this is a place where this keyword is mostly used. Now, what are the conventions of giving the names to the variables? Okay, so some standard naming convention which we should always follow, but few things, as you remember, there are certain reserved keywords are there in JavaScript which you cannot offer while giving the names to your variables or to your functions. Like if I can say var, let, const, and many more which are there available, which you cannot assign to your any existing variable provided or functions under your JavaScript. Now, here they are trying to say variable names cannot begin with any numeric value. Like you cannot give var with ABC. So not ABC, I would say rather 1, 2, 3 or something like that. So they must be a combination of, I would say, integer as well as a character. Okay, so they must only begin with letter or underscore characters. It is the same like as we have it in Java also. Now, naming conventions are very important. JavaScript is a case sensitive, hence the small a and capital A have two different meanings for the JavaScript. So that part needs to be well taken care of. Now, what is a callback in JavaScript? So you need to understand the callback in JavaScript is a kind of function which you are passing as a parameter to another function to execute. Okay, so callbacks are mainly designed to tell your application that they need to wait rather than continue to execute. So callbacks will help you to behave asynchronously, and that's what exactly this most valuable feature of JavaScript. So as I discussed already, so it is where the function needs to be passed to get executed. So how do you debug a JavaScript code? So to debug your JavaScript code in any browser, you can just press the F12, no matter which browser you have it, either Chrome or Firefox or anyone, you can just press the F12 key and there you can get this option called debugger, where you can just go and perform all the necessary debugging related stuff right over there. Or so many other editors like in Sublime Text, Visual Studio Code, Atom, they're all offering you the built-in support to debug your JavaScript code. Now, what is the difference between a function declaration and function expression? So there's a very simple difference. So when you say function ABC here, okay, so you declare as a separate statement within the same JavaScript code. Okay, in another example, what you do, you define a function within a variable name called A, which you can create to construct some another object for this. That's the only difference between these two. So this function can be called before the function is defined, and this will be created when the function is pointing and reaching it. Okay, so it can be used only after that. So that's what we have discussed it now. Going forward, this offers the better code readability and better code organization, and that the other part is basically used to create a conditional or a declaration functions. So what are the ways of adding the JavaScript code in an HTML file? So there are, I would say, two ways are available. One, either you can declare it in a separate file, you can add it, or second, you can write a embedded JavaScript code where you can just write a JavaScript code either in your head tag or body tag. But there'll be one difference, like if you're writing it as an embedded JavaScript, you cannot use it for the different HTML file, where the internal JavaScript file will be limited to that HTML. However, external JavaScript will be more useful when you want to reuse it again and again. So these were some standard basic JavaScript questions for us. So let's go ahead and talk about something which is related to your intermediate questions in JavaScript. Now, so what do you understand about the cookies? See, the cookies are basically a kind of a small text file, okay, which is kept in your browser and contains the information about your client activities. Okay, so whenever the client is accessing your websites, these websites can track your activities through this particular cookies. Okay, so they just basically record your general behaviors, like what you're doing with your website, so that accordingly they can give you the better recommendations. Now, how you're going to create a cookie in your JavaScript? So creating a cookie is one of the property available under your document object, so that you can create it using document.cookie and give a key. So your all cookie stands with your key and value pair. So you have a key, you have a value pair. So how are you going to read the cookie? So cookie you can read by the help of the same property called document.cookie, and here you can just use this statement. Like what? Key and value pair. So whatever the keys you have defined, similar key you will be reading it to give the value of whatever option you want to read it. Now, how are you going to delete the cookie? So cookie can be deleted it very easily by calling this delete cookie function, where you can just tell about the time and duration when you want the cookie to be get deleted. So when you set the expiry time, so cookies are deleted after a specific period of time, that will be treated as a good programming practice. So what is the difference between a let and var keyword? See, there's a new feature which is there added called let keyword, which is known as called block level scope. The block level scope means your variable whichever you're defining under any block level statement will be limited to that particular block. Like if you're defining it any opening block and closing block, so beyond that you cannot see that. Suppose if you're defining it under if block or any block, so these type of variables are no longer accessible outside, where the var keyword will be typically treated as a global variable and hence it can be accessed anywhere. So what is a closure in JavaScript? So closure is basically gonna give you a better way of providing the consistent way of developing a JavaScript code for the developer. So closures are basically created whenever a variable that is defined outside of this current scope can be accessed within the current scope. Okay, that means which is a variable which is defined outside of this scope, even using the scope of this particular closure, it can be accessed inside too. Now, what are the arrow functions in JavaScript? Friends, arrow function in JavaScript is very popular now. They're just gonna give you a kind of alternative way of defining the function keyword. They are just a shortcut way of defining the function in JavaScript. These are the simple handy functions, I would say. So what are the different ways of HTML can be accessed in JavaScript codes? So there are multiple ways are there. So you can access using document.getElement by class name. You can access getElement by ID. You can get access document getElement by tag name, and you can say document.querySelector. So these are the multiple options are where through which you can access the element within your HTML tags. What are the ways of defining a variable? So var keyword, as we discussed, you can define a variable. You can also define the variable using const. So if you define any variable using const, so these variables will get constantly declared and it cannot be changed once you define the value. So any value or any variable which is defined using const, it cannot be changed in later stages. What are imports and export in JavaScript? So to make your JavaScript modular, so there's an option available of importing it and exporting it. So what exactly the difference? Difference is very simple, like you are writing the set of JavaScript code, and if you want to get it accessed outside in another JavaScript file, so how the two JavaScript files can communicate with each other, that is where exactly the important export code comes to make your JavaScript highly reused and more modular. Now, these are the quick example. As you can see now, two different files are there. So if you want to make your particular variable or function accessed outside, you always use export keyword with them. And if you want to access them out, you can just use an import keyword. As you can see, it is defined there. So another file can easily access the content of the previous files to make your code even more modular and useful. So what is the difference between a document and window in JavaScript? See, document is the one which is a part of your document part, which user can actually see that. Okay, so the document object is the object which falls under the category of window. Window is a top level object. So in JavaScript we have an option variable name called BOM, that is called browser object model, in which the top level object which is there, that is called window, and under this we have a called document. So whatever you see under your browser, it is a part of your document. So what are some JavaScript frameworks and their uses? See, JavaScript frameworks are mainly useful to make your application more organized with less code and without getting into the detail. Okay, so having this particular framework will give you the opportunity so that developer can use the JavaScript in much more better way to write the complex code in more simplified manner. This is where exactly your frameworks are designed for. So there are some very prominent and useful frameworks like in React, Angular, Vue.js, and lot many other names are there in market, which will be using this JavaScript as a core and take the entire JavaScript development to the next level. So the next question is, what is the difference between a undefined and undeclared in JavaScript? See, it is very simple. Undefined means the variable which is undefined. You're declaring a variable, okay, and which you haven't defined. Okay, that means the variable has been declared but the value has not yet assigned. That is called undefined. Undeclared means the variable which you're trying to access, that itself is not available. It doesn't even exist. So what is the difference between undefined and null in JavaScript? See, undefined, as I already told you, it means the variable has been declared but it is not assigned with any value. Null is actually the assignment value that we can assign to any variable which contain no values, as an alternative I would say. So what is the difference between session storage and local storage? See, it is very simple. HTML5 has offered these features to you. So the session storage and local storage both offers you the data which can be stored in a browser, but session storage is short-lived. The moment your page is deleted or closed, the session data is immediately get deleted, where the local storage data is remain for the longer period of time, and the data doesn't get deleted after the browser history is over. Okay, so I would say the local storage time span is far bigger compared to the session storage. Okay everyone, so we'll have some advanced JavaScript questions now. We've already seen the beginner level as well as the intermediate level questions. Now it's time to discuss about some advanced level questions too. Like the first questions comes like, how do you empty an array in JavaScript? So it is very simple. If you want to assign, so there are a few ways of that. Number one, by assigning the array length to what? To the 0. So automatically turns to empty. Second is what? By assigning the completely empty array. Okay, the third will be by popping up all the elements of the array. So multiple options are there, and the last which you talk about called by using the splice function. So these are the 4 important aspects are there which you can treat how to empty your JavaScript array in a very simplified manner. Now, what is the difference between event capturing and event bubbling? See, this is one of the very common question. We talk about event capturing. Event capturing is actually the kind of process where you just try to capture the event of most outermost element and then propagating it to the innermost element. So event capturing is what, like you're talking about picking up the element or picking up the event from the outermost, like you talk about called nested div tags. So you pick up the particular event from the most outermost div tag and you're just passing it to the innermost. That is called capturing. The bubbling is the process, okay, which starts with the innermost and goes to the outermost element. It's just an opposite direction. That is called event bubbling. So the question is one of the very popular, like what is the strict mode in JavaScript? See, the strict mode of JavaScript is introduced to give the more better error handling capacity of the JavaScript. So whenever you talk about call strict mode, so all variables have to be declared explicitly. So you cannot leave it like that, and it cannot be assigned to the read-only properties. So we can enable the strict mode only by adding the use strict mode on the top of the JavaScript file. Now, what about and how we would be able to get the following output of the below JavaScript code? So we have a call var a equal to 10, and we have written one function in the if block, and after that we're just capturing the value of a, and then you are printing the value in a console.log. So what would be the output for that? See, it will be a call 10 undefined. Once again, it will be kind of what? It will be undefined. How come it would be? Look, it is very simple. First thing, okay, in your application, you are basically saying the if condition statement in the code will evaluate the eval function. As you know it very well, what exactly the evaluation is. Later on, the eval function, okay, will take the function and will return the function abc, whatever the function it is available, and then inside the if statement it executes the abc and returns the undefined, because as you know it very well, the if statement code executes at runtime while the statement inside this if condition is being evaluated. So that's where exactly it is. Next, can you write the JavaScript code for adding the new element in a dynamic manner? Yes, exactly, you can write it down. So you have this very common function available named document.createElement. Like people say, like I want to add the new text boxes when I click on the button. So I can write it very well. So either it will be a text box or it will be the new element you want to add it. So document.createElement is one of the very common, I would say, the function. And later on you can use the typical DOM functions, like I can talk about create next node or append child. So using this combination you can easily do so. Next, what is the difference between call and apply? Very common question. So the call method, whatever the method you have it in a call, these method arguments are provided individually, okay, along with this value. But in apply, what happens? Arguments are provided in the form of array along with this value. That is the only difference between call and apply. So what would be the output of the below JavaScript code? As you can see right now, we have written one object name called student, provided one property called college with abc. After that, you're saying object.create, passing this student as an object itself, and after that you're saying delete student1.college and console.log student.come. So what would be the value for this? So it is very simple. It is a very simple example of object orientation. So the output will be what? abc, as we are accessing the property of student object. So certainly the value will be what? abc for sure. Now what would be the output for below JavaScript code? As you can see, now we have written a one function foo and it is return 11. So we are saying type of foo. So this will certainly refer to what? To the error. Reason is why? Because the function definition can have only single reference variable as its name. That's why exactly it will be throwing what? An error to you. How do you remove the duplicate value from the JavaScript array? It is very simple. We have a called filter function. So the filter method, I can basically call it, and three arguments it may be expecting it: the name of the array, the current element, and the index of the current element, so that it can remove all the duplicate elements from there. So how do you remove the duplicate elements from JavaScript array? So it is the same way I told you, like first it takes 3 parameters. So using the filter method and by using the for loop, so the empty array is used for sorting all the repeating elements. So like that you can simply make it more easy. So how can you draw a simple JavaScript DOM? So you can say it is a very simple JavaScript DOM elements which are there, where you can have the document and then the HTML and followed by all child elements like an head tag, body may contain further child elements like an anchor tag. So these are all basically known as called a presentational elements through which this complete HTML hierarchy will contain inside this
React.js. Let's start with going through and exploring the general set of React.js interview questions that would be commonly asked in an interview. The first question would be, what are the features of React.js? Now, right through this session, we would follow a common methodology where we would explore the question and then look at the best way in which you could have answered that question if posed to you during a React.js interview. So starting with the first question, what are the features of React? So React has many extensions for complete application architecture support. JSX is used with React to describe what the user interface should typically look like. React is broken into small components. So you look at the complete application you want to build, break it down into individual components, and a component is typically a piece of user interface like a function that would return a stream of HTML characters. Speedy performance is one of the core features of React, as only the updated components need to be re-rendered on the screen and not the entire page. The one-way data binding feature, on the other hand, keeps everything modular and fast. The virtual DOM is also a lightweight representation of the real DOM, which is again a feature which helps speed up performance and avoids a full page refresh and a full DOM tree shake, which really speeds up performance. So what is JSX? How do you answer this? So JSX is typically the extension used for React, and it's nothing but an extension to the JavaScript programming language, because all that you can use inside your browser for execution typically has to be JavaScript, because in HTML5 you cannot have any third-party plugins installed in the browser, and that's the reason the browser would only ship by default with a JavaScript runtime engine. So by using JSX, you can write HTML structures in the same file that would contain your JavaScript code as well, making the updates to the code very simple. So it's simple to update and make modifications to your code, because the code and the data and the business logic is all composed in a single file. So because the code and the business logic is in a single file, it makes updating and incorporating change requests to the code very simple and easy. So it's basically used with React to describe what your user interface should look like, and it's what you typically would term as the HTML template or the view. Coming to the next question, can JSX be directly read by the web browser? So web browsers cannot read JSX directly. Now why is that? Well, the reason is simple. It's because they are only built to read regular JavaScript objects, and JSX is not a regular JavaScript object. It's a React component. So for a web browser to read a JSX file, the file needs to be transformed into a regular JavaScript object, and for this there is a JavaScript API called Babel, which is internally used by React. So what do you understand by the virtual DOM that we've been speaking about in React? So React gives a very lightweight representation of the real DOM, the actual DOM structure of the page. So DOM is Document Object Model. It is an API created by W3C, and it creates an in-memory representation of the HTML elements as a inverted tree structure, a balanced tree structure, which is the fastest search algorithm when you want to search for HTML elements and do a dynamic update on them. But again, updating the basic DOM tree structure of the page causes a full page refresh, and if you only want to update a specific component, you wouldn't need the entire page to be refreshed, and that is where React comes in. It uses a virtual DOM, which is a layer on top of the actual DOM, which ensures that only a certain part of the page is refreshed, and that speeds up performance. So when the state of an object changes, virtual DOM changes only that object in the real DOM instead of updating all the objects, and this is what makes things really fast. So why use React instead of other frameworks like Angular? First of all, it's very easy to create dynamic web pages, DHTML, where you can update the view or the template at runtime. The components are reusable, so you reuse rather than reinvent. The performance is great. since you're working with the virtual DOM, you don't need a full page refresh. The unidirectional data flow makes data move one way. There's no two-way data binding by default, and that's the reason the page does not have to do a lot of heavy lifting of remembering whether the view is changing, whether the base JavaScript entity class is changing, and that saves a lot of processing time. Again, to debug React is much more simpler, and that's what makes it more popular in terms of its simplicity and speed as compared to other frameworks like Angular. What is the difference between ES5 and ES6 standard? So these are scripting standards, okay, that are defined by the European Computer Manufacturers Association, or ECMA, and all of the scripting languages are a subset of the standard and are derived from these standards to ensure that the code will execute on all browsers, and the code that we are writing is standards based. So these are a few instances where ES6 syntax has changed from ES5. If you look at the ES5 syntax on the top, we are creating a simple React class component, and the render function just returns a stream of HTML content. In ES6, there's a new keyword that comes in, which is extends. So you are extending from the base React component and creating a custom component and then returning a stream of characters. Also, the function keyword no longer needs to be used. So the exports versus export also changes. So you use exports to export out class from a module so that it can be accessed from another module. In ES6, you simply say export and the component. Require versus import. So you would require a third-party component or an API into your JavaScript file to use it. In ES6, it's replaced with the import statement, very similar to the syntax that we use in core Java. So how do you go and create a React app? First, you install Node.js as a base platform, which you can download from the Node.js website. Next, any text editor of your choice, could be Atom, Visual Studio Code, or Sublime Text. Third, you create a React app using a command prompt terminal. Depending on the OS you are using, the command to give is create-react space my first app. Okay, so the command that you would give to create a new React app is create-react-app space and the name of the application you would want to create. In this case, it is my-first-app, and that could be a custom name of your choice. So what is an event in React? Well, on the web, when you talk about dynamic HTML, it's all about interacting with the user. So the user performs some interaction event with the web page, which could be a click of a button, a mouse move, and these events in action can be triggered by a user or any system, or could be pressing a key or a mouse click, etc. And in response to that event, you would execute a block of code, which is called an event handler. So here we have class simple, which is a custom class that extends the base React component, the name of the function work, which triggers a simple alert message box, and a render function which returns HTML. When you click on the button, we would want to bind that to the event handler this.work, and that's how you connect a click event to an event handler function. What are synthetic events in React? Well, a synthetic event is an object which acts as a cross-browser wrapper around the browser's native event. It combines the behavior of different browsers' native events into one API, which makes sure that the events are consistent across different browsers. And this brings in the standards-based development to ensure in this digital age, the code that we are creating for different browsers have consistency in terms of its execution. So here we see a function action link. We see a function handle click, which takes E as an event parameter. E.prevent default ensures that there is no error that the browser is raising in case the event function call is not directly compatible with that specific browser. So prevent default is used to suppress any browser specific errors or crashes. And a simple console.log, which will log into the developer tools window, which says you just clicked a link. And then we've got the return, where we are returning the view to or the HTML template, where on click we connect to this event handler called handle click. So handle click is basically a wrapper, and the entire action link is a wrapper object, which is a synthetic event. We don't directly go and bind to the on click and then associate a function with it. We actually associate a synthetic object with it, which binds the base default event that could be specific to a browser. So some browsers would probably understand an on-click, another browser would understand a click. And to ensure there is consistency of syntax and from a development perspective, the code that we write will run on all browsers, we need to take care of using the synthetic events which isolate the developer out from the complexity of writing code specific to different browsers. So you just write generic code which will work on different browsers. So how do lists work in React? So the lists display data in an ordered format. The traversal of lists is done using the map function. So here we see there is a function called list of names which takes a variable props as a parameter. Props.names will allow us to get a reference to all of the array of names that are passed. Constant list names is another variable created equal to names.map. And we are using the arrow operator, which is now an ECMAScript standard. And again, we are using the opening tag of the li HTML element. The key is equal to the name attribute. So the brace bracket will bind that to the name attribute. Then we just print the name itself and we close the li tag. So that's the names.map function. And finally, we return in an unordered list the list names themselves. So the map function will run through and iterate over the list of names, list them in the li tag. The li tag will get injected into the unordered list and will finally get returned out as a stream of HTML elements. In the next code snippet below, we create a constant variable names. We are associating it with a set of 5 names, and we simply say render list of names, names equal to names. The moment we do that, we are using list of names as a custom HTML element which is not system defined. It starts looking for the function list of names, passes the names array to it, iterates over it using the map function, which is an inbuilt React function, brings out all of the lists. It's very similar to a for loop that you would write for iteration in other programming languages. And then finally what you get returned in the get element by ID app is nothing but a list of simple names wrapped in a li element that are printed on the view. So why is there a need of using keys in lists? So keys are very important in the code snippet that we saw due to the following reasons. The first reason, the key is a unique identifier if you would want to search for a name in the list. It is used to identify which items have changed, updated, or deleted from the list. So if you want to perform CRUD operations on the data, you would want to search for which element do you want to update or delete or change. It also helps to determine which components need to be re-rendered instead of re-rendering all the components every time, and it increases performance as only the changed components have to be re-rendered and not all the components on the page. What are forms in React? So using forms, users can interact with the application and enter required information whenever needed. So forms can contain certain elements such as text fields, buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons, etc. And forms are also used for many different tasks such as user authentication, searching, filtering, etc. How do you create a form? Pretty simple. Again, create a custom component called nameFrom that will extend React.component. We create a state variable. This .state is equal to value. We handle the change by writing a handle change event, and we handle the submit by writing a handle submit event. In the change event, we just change the state by saying set state of the value to event.target.value, event being a system defined keyword passed as a parameter. And in the submit, we simply alert that a certain name was entered, and we trap the value that was entered into the form. Prevent default to suppress the browser from raising any errors. On the render function, we return a form. On the submit, we connect to the handle submit event and we bind the data submitted from the form to the handle submit event, and we pass the this pointer, which is a reference to the current context of the view itself. We open a label, specify the name, we then specify an input box as text. The value is set to this .state.value, and on change, we simply connect to the handle change event and bind to it and pass the context of the text box itself. So the moment we change the value in the text box as we are typing, the handle change event will receive the updated value and set the state. And when we click on the submit button, the handle submit event handler executes and we alert out the current value printed in the text box and that's it. So how do you write comments in React? When you're a developer, if you want to comment out some code, or if you want to set comments to enhance the maintainability of the code, a single line comment is as simple as given in most other programming languages: \* to open, * to close. Multi-line comments follow the same syntax and can span multiple lines to add comments to functions in terms of what the function can do and what are the types that it can return. What is the arrow function and how is it used? So an arrow function is a shorter way of writing a function in React. If you look at the snippet on the top, my input on change equal to, we are connecting to this.handleChange.bind, and that's the longer version of how you can connect it to an event handler. The shorter version is on change equal to e arrow operator this.handle on change. So you don't need to call the bind explicitly. You can replace that with the arrow operator and reduce the amount of code that you typically write. How is React different from React Native? So React and React Native are completely different. React was released in 2013. It's a web-based platform. It is HTML compliant. It generates HTML views. It uses CSS for styling, and it's based on JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. React Native, on the other hand, is targeted to mobility devices. It's meant to create installable apps on Android and iOS. Released in 2015, not based on HTML and CSS, and it basically requires the React.js API to create these installable apps for these mobility ecosystems. How is React different from Angular, another popular framework by Google? So Angular, created by Google, completely based on the model view controller pattern, works on the real DOM layer and requires a full tree shake at the DOM layer to update views and components. Supports bidirectional data binding. The rendering is purely done on the client side. The performance comparatively slow. React.js, on the other hand, created by Facebook, it's the view layer of the model view controller pattern. It works at the virtual DOM layer and is hence faster. It's unidirectional data binding and not two-way. And the rendering is typically what is done at the server side, and what you get as a response on the client is a stream of HTML characters as an output. Let's talk about and discuss some questions around React components. So what are components in React? So these are the building blocks. You can think of them as Lego blocks. So you break your problem down into small parts, each part identifying a certain solution of the problem, which is what we define as a component. So they are building blocks of a React application, and a single app usually consists of multiple components. So it splits the UI into independent reusable pieces that can be processed separately. A component is essentially a piece of the user interface or the HTML view. What is the use of render method in React? So it is compulsory for each component to have a render method. If not, there wouldn't be any HTML for the component to render on your view. So the render function returns the HTML, which is to be displayed within a component. Like you see on the screen, there is a class app that extends the React component, and it returns a simple h1 element called hello Simplilearn. And of course, do remember to export the app out so that it can be accessed from other components as well. If you need to render more than one element, all the elements must be inside a single parent tag like a div or a form. What is state in React? The state of a component is an object that holds some data within it. The data would influence the output of the component. Now, how do you implement state in React? So state holds the data that a component renders on the web application. For example, here we've created in the constructor this.state equal to, and this temporary anonymous object has two attributes, car and bike. When we return, we simply return this.state.car and this.state.bike. Now this is how you would create stateful components and access the state properties within the view. How do you update the state of a component? By using the built-in setState method, you can go ahead and update the state of the component. So here we have a simple render function that returns the state itself, state.message, and on the onClick connects to a button press function. The moment you click on the button press function sets the state to another message. So the initial message in the constructor is welcome to Simplilearn. The moment you click on the button, the setState triggers and changes it to best place to learn. So the data on the view would be updated. What are props in React? Well, props is just a short form for properties, and that is what allows us to pass arguments or data to a component. Props are passed to components in the way similar to that of attributes that are passed to an HTML element. So how do you pass props between two components? So let's say we have an app.js component on the top and a main.js component at the bottom. At the top, we are trying to return this.props.car and the bike. So two car and bike attributes associated with this props of the app component. In the main component, when you look at the render function, we are associating car prop equal to a value of 1600 cc and bike prop equal to value of 150 cc. And to access it, if you look at the import statement, we are importing app from app.jsx. And this is how you can cross-access properties from one component within the other. So what are the difference between state and props? Well, state holds information about the components. They are mutable, they can be changed, they cannot be accessed by child components, and they cannot have state. Props allow to pass data from one component to the other as an argument. They are immutable, they are read-only, and props can be accessed by the child component, and they can have props as well. What is a higher order component in React? So these act as a container for other components, which helps in keeping components simple and induces the reusability factor. They are generally used when a common logic has to be used by multiple components. That's when you group together a set of components within a higher order component in React. How can you embed two or more components into one? This code snippet demonstrates the app component, which returns a hello text, and it has a custom tag called simple. The simple tag is defined in the component below, and it returns text called Simplilearn. And in the render of the React DOM, we simply go and render the app component. So hello Simplilearn would be the final output, and that's how you can embed one component into the other using this methodology. What are the differences between class and functional components? So stateful components would extend React component in this case, and if you could look at the render, it simply renders this .props.title. The constant stateless component would be equal to props. The div tag returns this .props.title. So you can look at the style, very different in terms of class and functional components. One using the arrow operator, one using the traditional class and render method. So the class component can hold or manage state. Complex as compared to stateless components, can work all of the lifecycle methods of the component, and it can be reused. The functional component cannot hold or manage state. They are simple and easy to understand. It does not work with any lifecycle method, and it cannot be reused. Let's explain the lifecycle methods of components. We've got initial state, which is executed before the creation of the component. Component did mount, which is executed when the component gets rendered and placed on the DOM. Should component update, which is invoked when a component decides any changes to the DOM and returns true or false value based on certain conditions. Component did update, it is invoked immediately after the rendering takes place. Component will unmount, which is invoked immediately before a component is destroyed, and unmounted permanently. Let's move to the React Redux set of questions. So what is Redux? It's an open source JavaScript library used to manage application state, and React uses Redux for building the user interface. What are components of Redux? The first is the store, which holds the state of the application. Store contains state, which defines the user interface, which triggers a set of actions, which are then sent to the reducer. So store holds the state, action is the source information for the store, and reducer specifies how the application state changes in response to actions sent to the store. What is Flux? Well, Flux is the application architecture that Facebook uses for building web applications. And it works in this way. The action is triggered, which is sent to the dispatcher. The dispatcher sends it to the store sends it to the view, and the view sends it back to the action. And that's exactly how the steps would continue in sequence. So when we trigger an action, the dispatcher will get notified. Once the dispatcher has dealt with an action, the store's listening to it will get triggered. The view gets updated when the state of the store changes. User action at the view is sent to the dispatcher to then be processed. How is Redux different from Flux? Redux is an open source JavaScript library used to manage application state. The store state is immutable. It can only have a single store, and it uses the concept of reducer. Flux, on the other hand, is an architecture and not a framework or library. The store state is mutable. It can have multiple stores, and it uses the concept of dispatcher. Let's look at some React router questions. What is a React router? A React router is a package which is used to create routing in a React application. React Router is used for developing single-page web applications. It allows multiple views in a single application by defining multiple routes in that React application. How is React routing different from conventional routing? React routing has a single HTML page. It uses, or the end user rather, would navigate multiple views within the same file called a single page app. The page does not refresh since it's a single page file, and there is improved performance since you're not navigating across multiple pages. Conventional routing, each view is a separate HTML file. The user would navigate multiple files for each view. The page would refresh every time the user navigates, which would hence result in slower performance. How do you implement React routing? You can implement React routing using a very simple method. Considering the above components, let's say you've got a component called app, about, and contact. So here you can specify the route path. If the route path is just slash the root default route, it takes you to the app component. If the route is slash about in the URL given by the end user, you automatically navigate and activate and load the about component. And if the URL is slash contact, it would take you to the contact component. Let's talk about React styling questions. How do you style React components? Either you use inline styling by using simple CSS, by simply saying color blue, and that's going to be the output of the H1 element. Or I could use a JavaScript object by specifying a constant simple style object and specifying a key pair value of color, background color, margin, font family, and apply that object as the style parameter, which would result in this styled output. How do you style React components using a CSS style sheet? So here's an external style sheet. So we've written all the styling rules in a separate CSS file, app.css. We've imported that at the top of the app.js React class, and lo and behold, you have the output simplified as generated on your page. Let's explain the use of CSS modules in React. So a CSS module file is created. .module.css is the extension. The CSS inside a module file is available only for the component that is importing it, so there are no naming conflicts. So .button is the CSS styling inside button.module.css, and that is what we've imported from in the app.js file. So when you view the button, styles.button is the styling picked up from the button.module.css.
I've classified the questions into two sections. One is the beginner level questions and one is the advanced level questions. So now let's begin with beginner level questions. Starting with the most basic, what exactly is Angular? Now, Angular is an open source JavaScript front-end framework which is completely written in TypeScript. This framework brings structure and consistency to web applications and provides excellent scalability and maintainability. Now, it's primarily aimed to develop single-page applications and is maintained by Google. It uses HTML's syntax to express your application's components clearly. It is designed for web, desktop, and mobile platforms. Next up is what exactly is TypeScript. Now, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that offers excellent consistency. It is highly recommended as it provides some syntactic sugar and makes the code base more comfortable to understand and maintain. Ultimately, TypeScript code compiles down to JavaScript that can run efficiently in any environment. Now, typically, TypeScript is installed as an npm package and thus can be installed with the following command, that is npm install -g TypeScript. Moving on to our third question. What exactly is data binding and which type of data binding does Angular deploy? Now, data binding is a phenomenon that allows any internet user to manipulate web page elements. Now, it generally uses dynamic HTML and does not require any complex scripting or programming. We use data binding in pages that contain interactive components such as forms, calculators, tutorials, and games. Data binding makes incremental display of a web page more convenient. When it comes to Angular, it uses the two-way data binding. Any changes made to the user interface are reflected in the corresponding model state. Conversely, any changes in the model state are reflected in the UI state. This allows the framework to connect the DOM to the model data via the controller. Next question, what are single-page applications? Now, single-page applications are web applications that load just once, with new features just being mere additions to the user interface. It does not load new HTML pages to display the content. Instead, it's generated dynamically. This is made possible through JavaScript's ability to manipulate the DOM elements on the existing page itself. An SPA approach is faster, thus providing a seamless user experience. Differentiate between Angular and AngularJS. Now here's a simple table for you. So here are the features that we're going to differentiate the two on the basis of. First is language. AngularJS uses JavaScript while Angular uses TypeScript. When it comes to architecture, AngularJS supports the model view controller design while Angular uses components and directives. AngularJS is not supported by mobile browsers while Angular supports all mobile browsers. AngularJS does not support dependency injection while Angular does. When it comes to routing, @route_provider is used to provide routing information in the case of AngularJS, and in case of Angular, @route_configuration is used to define routing information. When it comes to management, AngularJS is difficult to manage with an increase in source code size, while Angular is better structured, easy to create, and can manage bigger applications. Next up, what are decorators in Angular? Decorators are a design pattern or functions that define how Angular features work. Now they are used to make prior modifications to a class, service, or filter. Angular supports 4 types of decorators, namely class decorators, property decorators, method decorators, and parameter decorators. Next question, mention some advantages of Angular. First up is custom components. Now Angular enables users to build their own components that can pack functionality along with rendering logic into reusable pieces. This is achieved with the help of these components. Data binding. As discussed earlier, Angular enables users to effortlessly move data from JavaScript code to the view and react to users' events without having to write any code manually. Angular supports dependency injection, which enables users to write modular services and inject them wherever they needed. When it comes to testing, tests are first-class tools and Angular has been built from ground up with testability in mind. You will have the ability to test every part of your application, and that is highly recommended. Next up is comprehensive. Angular is a full-fledged framework and provides out-of-the-box solutions for server communication, routing with your application, and more. Lastly, Angular is cross-platform and compatible with multiple browsers. An Angular application can typically run on all browsers, be it Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and operating systems like Windows, macOS, and Linux. What's new with Angular 10? First up is that older versions of TypeScript are not supported. Previous versions of Angular supported TypeScript 3.6, 3.7, and even 3.8. But with Angular 10, TypeScript bumped to TypeScript 3.9. Warnings about common JS imports. Now, logging of unknown property bindings or element names in templates is increased to the error level, which was previously a warning. Angular now supports an optional strict setting, which offers a stricter project setup when you create a new workspace. There's an addition of ngCC features with a program-based entry point finder. There are common compiler updates and updated URL routing. Angular 10 has several deprecated APIs that were previously redundant. With Angular 10 version, there have been a number of bug fixes, important ones being the compiler avoiding undefined expressions and the core avoiding a migration error. New default browser configuration. Browser configuration for new projects has been upgraded to outdo older and less used browsers. Next up is core. All the warnings will be now logged in as errors. Next update is converting pre-IV code. Now all the pre-IV dependencies from NPM should be transformed to IV dependencies, which is supposed to take place as a precursor to running ngtsc at the application. And lastly, we have service workers. For the service worker, a fix has been put in for a situation in which there was a chance that the service worker would not register when there is a long running task or a recurring timeout. Next up is what are templates in Angular. Now Angular templates are written with HTML that contains Angular specific elements and attributes. Now in combination with model and controllers information, these templates can be rendered to provide a dynamic view to the user. Now templates are a very predominant feature of Angular that describe how information can be displayed in the view. Next question is what are annotations in Angular? Now these annotations are used to create an annotation array. They are basically the metadata set on the class that is used to reflect the metadata library. What are directives in Angular? Directives are attributes that allow the user to write new HTML syntax specific to their applications. Now these execute whenever the Angular compiler finds them in the DOM. Now again, Angular supports 3 different types of directives. There are component directives, attribute directives, and structural directives. Next up, what is AOT compilation and what are some of its advantages? Now AOT, that stands for Ahead of Time Compiler, basically converts the Angular HTML and TypeScript into JavaScript code during the build phase. That is before the browser downloads and runs the code. So basically all the HTML and TypeScript code is converted to JavaScript during the build phase, which means no additional time is spent on converting it into JavaScript later during the run phase, right? So when it comes to advantages, of course, there's faster rendering. There are fewer asynchronous requests. It has smaller Angular framework download size. There's quick detection of errors, and this also offers better security. Moving on to the next question, what are components? Now, components are the most basic building blocks of the UI in an Angular application. Now, every component is associated with a template and is a subset of directives. Only one component can be instantiated per element in a template. Now, an Angular application typically consists of a root component, which is basically the app component, and then it branches out into other components, creating a hierarchy. Now, every component is decorated with the help of @componentDecorator, which provides additional information. And component must belong to the ng module. Lastly, components implement something called the lifecycle hooks. You will learn about them a little later in the video. Next up, what are pipes in Angular? Now, pipes are simple functions that are designed to accept a particular input value, process this value, and return an output which is a transformed value. Now, Angular supports several built-in pipes. However, you can also create custom pipes that cater to your needs. But to speak about a few salient features, pipes are defined using the pipe symbol. Pipes can be chained with other pipes, and pipes can be provided with arguments by using the colon sign. Next up, what are pure pipes? Now, these pipes are pipes that use pure functions. As a result of this, a pure pipe doesn't use any internal state, and the output remains the same as long as the parameters passed stay the same. Angular calls a pure pipe only when it detects a change in the parameters being passed. Now, a single instance of a pure pipe is used throughout all components. Next up, what are impure pipes? Now, for every change detection cycle in Angular, these impure pipes are called regardless of the change in the input fields. As long as there is a change detected, these pipes are called. As a result, multiple pipe instances are created for these pipes. Now, inputs passed to these pipes can also be mutable. By default, all pipes are pure. However, you can also mention impure pipes using the pure property. Now here's a code for specifying impure pipes. You can use the pure property and either mention true or false. True meaning it's a pure pipe and false indicates that it's an impure pipe. Next up, what is the pipe transform interface? Now, as the name suggests, the interface receives an input value and transforms it into the desired format with a transform method. It is typically used to implement custom pipes. Now here's again a small piece of code. Now you can see that the pipe transform interface is being used, which in turn executes the transform method. Now this transform method is the one that is responsible to change your input and give a transformed output. Moving on, what is ng module? Now ng modules are basically containers that reserve a block of code to an application domain or a workflow. Now the @ng module takes a metadata object that describes how to compile a components template and generate an injector at runtime. In addition to this, ng module also identifies the module's components, directives, services, pipes, and it also ensures that it makes them public so that external components can use them. All of this is taken care of by the ng module. Next up, what are filters in Angular? Now, filters are used to format an expression and present it to the user. They can be used in view templates, controllers, or services. Now, to name a few, there's date filter, which formats a date to a specified format. There's filter that selects a subset of items from an array. There's the JSON filter, which formats an object to a JSON string. There's limit to, which limits an array or a string into a specified number of elements or characters. Then there's lowercase, which formats a string to lowercase, and so on. Moving on to the next question, what is view encapsulation in Angular? Now, view encapsulation basically defines whether the template and styles defined within the component can affect the application or vice versa. Angular provides 3 encapsulation strategies. There's emulated encapsulation, which means that the styles from the main HTML propagate to the component. Then there is native, which indicates that the styles from the main HTML do not propagate to the component, meaning it does not affect the component. And lastly, there's none, which means that styles from the component propagate back to the main HTML and therefore are visible to all the components on the page. Now this indicates any different types of changes and how it is affecting the entire application. Moving on, what are controllers? Now, as the name suggests, controllers control the data of Angular applications. They are regular JavaScript objects, and the ng controller directive defines the application controller. Next question, what do you understand by scope in Angular? Now, the scope in Angular binds the HTML, that is basically the view, and the JavaScript, that is the controller. It is also an object with the available properties and methods required for your application. Now, when you make a controller in Angular, you pass the $scope object as an argument. Moving on to the most commonly asked question, explain the lifecycle hooks in Angular. As discussed earlier, every component in Angular has a lifecycle. Angular creates and renders these components and also destroys them before removing them from the document object model. It is achieved with the help of these lifecycle hooks. Now let's have a look at them. First up is ng on changes. Now this responds when Angular sets or resets data-bound input properties. ng on it is a hook that initializes the directive or a component after Angular first displays the data-bound properties and sets the component's input properties. ng do check detects and acts upon the changes that Angular can't or won't detect on its own. ng after content init responds after ng projects external content into the component's view. ng after content checked Response after Angular checks the content projected into the component. ng after viewInit. Response after Angular initializes the component's views and child views. ng after viewChecked. Response after Angular checks the component's views and the child views. Lastly, there's ng on destroy, which cleans up just before Angular destroys the directive or the component. Moving on to the next question. What is string interpolation in Angular? Now, string interpolation is a one-way data binding technique that is used by Angular. Now, it outputs the data from TypeScript code to HTML view. It is typically denoted with the help of curly braces, and it helps display data from the component to the view. To help you understand its working, I've created a variable called name here in my app.component.ts file and initialized it to Simplilearn. And back in my HTML file, I've created a header tag which displays the name of the company is, and I've interpolated here with the help of double curly braces. So when I run the file, the output looks something like this. The name of the company is Simplilearn. So this is how string interpolation is achieved in Angular. Moving on to next question. What are template statements? Template statements are properties or methods used in HTML for responding to user events. Now with these template statements, the application that you create or you're working on can have the capability to engage users through actions such as submitting forms or displaying dynamic content. The most common example is the button tag. The template here is delete hero. This method is called when the user clicks on the button. So this brings interactivity to your application. With that, we come to the end of the first section, which included the beginner level questions. Moving on, let's look at some advanced level questions. What is the difference between ahead of time and just-in-time compilation? Now, ahead of time compilation converts your code during the build time before the browser downloads and runs the code. In case of just-in-time compilation, this process is a way of compiling computer code to machine code during the execution phase. AOT ensures faster rendering to the browser, while just-in-time is basically a dynamic compilation. In case of ahead of time compiling, the user should include the --AOT option with the ng build or ng serve command. NGIT compilation is the default compilation when you run the ng build or ng serve CLI commands. Next up, explain the @component decorator. Now here's a simple screenshot of what the @component decorator encompasses. It is basically a TypeScript class that is used to create components. This genre of class is then decorated with the @component decorator. The decorator's purpose is to accept a metadata object that provides relevant information about the component. Now the image above shows an app component, which is a pure TypeScript class decorated with the @component decorator. The object that gets accepted by the decorator provides properties like template URL, selectors, style URLs, and many more. Now here the template URL property points to an HTML file defining what you see on the application. Moving ahead, what are services in Angular? Angular services perform tasks that are used by multiple components. Now these tasks could be data fetching, network connections, or database management, among others. They perform all the operational tasks for the components and avoid rewriting of code. A service can be written once and then injected into all the components that use it. Generally, components are used to only display information on the UI. They do not perform any other backend tasks. To perform tasks like validating information or network connections, etc., you can make use of a service. One advantage is that this service can be injected into multiple components that make use of the same piece of code. With this, you can avoid redundancy. Moving on, what are promises and observables? Now, while both the components deal with asynchronous events in Angular, Promises handle one such event at a time, while observables handle a sequence of events over some time. So to give you a brief explanation, promises emit a single value at a time, while observables are only executed when subscribed to them using the subscribe method. Now, promises also execute immediately after they are created and they're not cancelable, while observables help perform operations like for each, filter, retry, etc. Promises push errors to the child promises, and observables can be unsubscribed to so that the listener stops receiving further values. Next up, what is ng on init and how is it defined? Now again, here's a small snippet of code. ng on init is a lifecycle hook, as we discussed earlier, and it is a callback method that is run by Angular to indicate that a component has been created. It takes no parameters and returns a void type. So I'm sure you can see here in the code, it takes no parameters and returns a void. Next up, explain the use of ng for in a tag, or explain the ng for directive. Now, the ng for directive is basically like a for loop. It is used to build lists and tables in HTML templates. So in simple terms, this directive is used to iterate over an array or an object and create template for each such element. Now in the snippet, you can see there is let items in item list, and then I've string interpolated the variable item. So let item here creates a local variable that will be available inside the template. Of items indicates that we are iterating over the items iterable, and the asterisk before ng for creates a parent template. Next up, what are template and reactive forms? So there are two different methods to create forms. We have the template driven approach and we have the reactive form approach. So let's have a look at them. In case of template driven approach, the conventional form tag is used to create forms. Angular automatically interprets and creates a form object representation for this tag. Controls can be added to the form using the ng model tag. Multiple controls can be grouped using the ng control group module. Now, a form value can be generated using the form.value object, and form data is exported as JSON values. Basic HTML validations can be used to validate the form fields. In the case of custom validations, directives can be used. When it comes to reactive forms, this approach basically revolves around data flows and propagation of change. Now with reactive forms, the component directly manages the data flows between the form controls and the data models. Reactive forms are code-driven, unlike template-driven approach. Reactive forms break the traditional declarative approach and eliminate the anti-pattern of updating data via the two-way data binding method. Typically, reactive form control creation is synchronous and can be unit tested with synchronous programming techniques. Moving on, what is Bootstrap? How is it added to Angular? Now, Bootstrap is a powerful toolkit. It is a collection of basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript tools for creating and building responsive web applications. There are two ways to embed Bootstrap libraries. First up is using the Bootstrap CDN, which is the Content Delivery Network. Now, this enables users to load the CSS and JavaScript files remotely from its servers. The other way is to use Angular Bootstrap via NPM. Now, this is used to add Bootstrap to your Angular project by installing it into your project folder. Now, you can use commands like npm install bootstrap and npm install jQuery to install them for your project. If you wish to learn Bootstrap in detail, I highly suggest you check out our video on Angular Bootstrap. The tutorial explains how to embed Bootstrap and use it to create and good-looking Angular applications. What is eager and lazy loading? Eager loading is the default module loading strategy. Now, all the feature modules under eager loading are loaded before your application even starts. This is typically used for small size applications since lesser modules are used. All of these modules are loaded initially, which makes running of these kind of applications extremely fast. When it comes to lazy loading, all the loading happens dynamically. All feature modules are loaded on demand. It is used for bigger applications where the modules are not required at the start of applications. This makes the application faster since no time is spent on loading unnecessary modules. Next up, what type of DOM does Angular implement? DOM, or Document Object Model, treats an XML or HTML document as a tree structure in which each node is an object representing a part of the document. Now Angular uses the regular DOM. This updates the entire tree structure of HTML tags until it reaches the data that has to be updated. Now to ensure that the speed and performance are not affected, Angular implements something called as a change detection. Next up, how is dependency injection achieved in Angular? Now dependencies are objects or services that a component needs to perform functions, correct? Now with the help of dependency injection, these classes can request dependencies from external sources rather than creating them on their own. Here I've created a service called demo service using the command ng service demo service, and I've also added the small snippet of code when you create that service. Now these services can be injected to your main component and perform various functions. Next up, how does Angular routing work? Now I'm sure you must have observed that the URL changes every time you click on your user interface on an application, correct? Every time you navigate through the application or move from one page to another, the URL changes. Now this means that the application is being routed or you're navigating through the application. So basically routing helps navigate through a web application, especially in case of single page applications. Now as discussed earlier, single page applications are loaded just once. So any new content that is being displayed is just a mere addition. It's not being loaded again. So routing plays a vital role in case of single page applications. Typically it is specified with the help of the / and followed by a path that defines the new content. Now I'm just taking the same example that I took before. This was the example for string interpolation. However, you can see that we have a navigation bar here with 4 different options, for that is home, about, services and login. And for home and login, I've created a path and added routing to it. So when I click on the home icon, you can see that some content is being displayed onto the screen. And if you observe, you can see that there is a / with the path name home here, which indicates that routing has occurred. Same with login. When I click on it, the path changes and the login page appears. If you wish to learn the concept of routing, I suggest you check out a video. The tutorial explains routing in detail. Moving on, what are form control and form groups? Now, a form control is basically a class that enables validation. For each input field, an instance of this class is created. And these instances help check the values of the field and see if they are touched, untouched, dirty, pristine, valid, invalid, or so on. So for every field in the form, the data that is being provided is validated with the help of these controls. If it is dirty, it means that the value has been changed. If the data provided holds good for a particular condition, then the control is said to be valid, and so on. With the help of these controls, you can determine if the value provided is legitimate or not. This can be achieved with the help of form control. When it comes to form group, the form group class represents a group of controls. Now a form can have multiple control groups. The form group class returns true if all the controls are valid and also provides validation errors if any. Next up is how is testing achieved in Angular. Now Angular uses Jasmine to run various tests. The Jasmine framework allows various functionalities to write different kinds of test cases. The task runner for these tests is typically Karma, And Karma uses a configuration file to set the startup, reporters, and the testing framework. Next question is, what is package.json? Now npm installs package.json when a new workspace is created. Now this file includes a starter set of packages, some of which are required by Angular. Now typically it's organized into two groups. One is dependencies. These are essential to run your applications. And we have dev dependencies. These are essential to develop applications.
With this, we wrap up top front-end interview questions. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe to Simplilearn. Thanks for watching this video.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.